Okay, so good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very pleased to welcome you on behalf of the European Commission to this workshop dedicated to the European mission Restore Our Ocean and Waters by 2030. I'm Christos Economou. I am acting director in the European Commission, DG Mare, and I'm the manager of this mission. So as this workshop is hybrid, taking place both in Portorož as well as online, I welcome also our online participants. The mission, Restore Our Ocean and Waters by 2030, is a new major European initiative to deliver on Green Deal objectives for our oceans and waters. It was launched very recently, as I said, on 29 September 2021 within the European Programme for Research and Innovation, Horizon Europe. You are probably familiar with that, but the mission goes much beyond research and innovation, and you will be able to see that and hear about it from a presentation that my colleague from DG John Bell, will do right after this introduction. John Bell is the Deputy Mission Manager and will guide us through the technicalities and objectives of the mission. Of course, the reason that we are here is that we definitely want to show you how relevant this mission is for the European small and medium enterprises and the business communities, as it focuses on innovation in business models, opening of new markets, and innovation in investment tools to support the achievement of the mission objectives. Europe's innovative SMEs are our key mission partners in path for a sustainable, carbon neutral, and circular blue economy, and protection and restoration of key life-supporting ecosystems of this planet. Beyond the introductory presentation that John Bell will do, we have on our program today a discussion with Ms. Kirsten Dunlop, who is the CEO of the Climate Knowledge and Innovation Center, and she's joining us online. I also have, Kirsten has a lot of valuable experience in building innovation, investment, and business communities. So I welcome her already to this mixed panel. And I say mixed because the discussion will also involve here in the room, Darko Manakovsky, who is one of the mission board members, an expert in investments into ecosystem restoration in the blue economy. Welcome, Darko. After this discussion, we will have a short break, which will be here in Portorož, followed by a participatory session, in which you will all have the opportunity to emerge deeper in the mission and its activities. You will also have the opportunity to shape the future investment communities of this mission, we hope. The session will be moderated by our participatory team, Sabine Soder, Wibke Herding, and Kasia Baluska-Debska, and also with the help of the colleagues of the Commission, Helena Meyer and Eva Zika from the Mission Secretariat. Since a key component of the mission is being bold, innovative, inspirational, we have taken this to the heart also of the workshop. In cooperation with Jan Stonberg and his team in the Silicon Hagen, it's an innovative European SME, we have prepared an online tool that gives the possibility to the participants to be part of an innovative online world. I will explain you this. While we were discussing in the Portorož, Jan and his team, together with Kasia, will engage with online participants on a beach cleanup experience in an extended virtual reality world created especially for this occasion. So, moreover, our online participants will have an opportunity to dive deeper in the mission activities and discuss them. They will later on join again the wrap-up session of this workshop and the participatory session that will be taking place in this room. And then we have the opportunity then to wrap up and give you also the outline of this discussion. And this is not yet all. After the wrap-up, we will have also the possibility to see the suggestions of our online participants at the mission stand located on the 12th floor as from 17 hours. So my team, Elena and Eva and Darko, of course, we will be available to answer your questions and discuss further with you as from 17 hours, as I said. For the online participants, you will also have an opportunity to visit the virtual world at the mission stand, at the virtual reality corner, in person after the workshop, with full virtual reality equipment, together with Jan and his team. So these are all the introductory remarks from my side. I will give the floor immediately to John Bell, who is following from Brussels. And John, up to you now for the presentation of the mission, and I'll be happy to continue after that.
Thank you, Christos, and Dobodan Porteros. So where are we? We've all been watching on our screens what has been happening in Glasgow in the last few days. And if nothing else, we understand that we have a great transition ahead for our society, our ecology, and our economy. The European Union's Green Deal, which you'll hear a lot about in these events, is not simply a series of policies. It is an invitation to all of us to design this transition together in a fair way and to design it using all the means at our disposal. And innovation may very well be the secret algorithm of transition. So our conversations this afternoon are central to how we make this transition happen. Now you'll see this word mission. Mission thinking is what's inspiring us here, folks. Our task in the European Union is to make peace with nature. That's our task for the next 30 years. How we're going to do that is requiring a completely different approach to the kind of instruments and collective action that we have. And mission thinking is inspired by those people who went to the moon and back in the 1960s. Our task is to go to the next version of this planet and bring it back to the people who are going to have to live and work and have their lives and cultures here. So the mission is a new way of thinking about how to do systemic change by design that involves research and innovation and ideas and business processes and investment, everything that we've got to set a new destination for where we want to be around some of the critical life support systems that we're dealing with. And fundamentally, it's about mobilizing people and citizens in making that transition happen. And the mission we're talking about here, the mission to restore our ocean waters by 2030, may seem a slightly strange title. Our blind spot, folks, is the fact that our main life support system we have disconnected from. Our oceans, our rivers, the water that makes us up and upon which we depend is at a distressing tipping point from pollution, collapsing systems, climate impact, and the impact of human interaction in different ways with it. And the task of this mission is, number one, to reconnect people emotionally and politically with the water system that sustains us, to mobilize people to fix it, and to put the instruments in place at European, national, local, and regional level to make that happen. So the European missions have been designed within the context of Horizon Europe to bring concrete solutions and pathways to our greatest challenges. There's supposed to be a new collaborative approach to address these challenges. They are focused fundamentally on impact, on actually designing the destinations and delivering and leveraging the means to get there. Taking research and innovation out from its role as being an observation process and into its role as setting direction and supporting, enabling, de-risking, deploying, demonstrating, and disseminating the means of getting there. It will require innovation, new forms of governance, and a new way of getting our citizens to make that journey and to set that direction with us. The novelty and added value, of course, is that we'll work with a portfolio of actions across different instruments, business models, and investment communities at all different levels, whether it's at the European level, national, regional, or locally. The missions to succeed are not like financial programs. The audit is not a financial audit. It is a planetary and societal audit. Do we get to the places that we need to get to live within a changed climate and a changed environment? So they must connect directly with citizens, involving citizens in design, implementation, and monitoring. And if those of us who are living through the current crisis and COVID have learned anything, is that science does not stand outside of society. We will not make changes and transitions if we don't have everybody involved in the journey. So missions are supposed to be bold, inspirational, widely relevant to society, clearly framed, targeted, measurable, and time-bound. They're supposed to have impact-driven but realistic goals, and then mobilize and convene and synergize all of the resources across the different actors that are involved in, linking disciplines and all of the different programs and actors to achieve these goals with citizens at the center. So the Commission in September of last year launched 5 European missions. Each has a specific time frame and a budget tailored to its challenge, and a publicly available implementation plan, which I encourage you to look at next. The mission Restore Our Ocean and Waters by 2030 is built on the recommendations of the mission board led by Pascal Lamy, in which Darko, our colleague present here, was one of the inspirational forces. These were published in the Starfish report in September 2020, and based on these recommendations, the Commission has prepared a detailed and public implementation plan for the mission, which outlines all of the actions and activities for the years to come. Most importantly, the mission implements a systemic approach to the restoration of the health of our ocean and waters, as suggested by the mission board, working across all of the different parts of the water system and bringing together and mobilizing stakeholders. Next. The European Union can only fulfill our European Green Deal objectives if we address our blind spot on the oceans. The good health of the ocean and water system, what we call the hydrosphere, as distinct from the atmosphere, this single connected system of ocean, seas, coastal and inland waters, which covers 75% of the Earth's surface, and which dictates climate and food systems and weather and all of the other things upon which our society and civilizations are built, is a system which is facing unique challenges and pressures in its history, from pollution, climate change, human exploitation, to mention but a few. Restoring the health and natural capital of the ocean and water system is fundamental to ensuring the health, well-being and prosperity to our citizens, where we live, our society, and is the opportunity to develop the next economy. But there is an urgency to act. Next. The mission is designed to deliver on the European Union's 2030 measurable targets, and this is one of the thinking, is to take this journey and to use these targets that are set out in law across all of the systemic changes that the European Green Deal provides, and to use the mission to navigate a way forward in achieving these where we live and work. So it will deliver on the European Union's 2030 measurable targets for protecting and restoring ecosystems and biodiversity, to attain zero pollution, and to decarbonize and achieve net greenhouse gas emissions reductions to climate neutrality, our destination, across the European Union's ocean, seas and water systems. These 3 objectives are the, if you like, the foundational parts of the mission and the goals upon which we're organizing the journey. First, to restore the ocean and water by protecting and restoring the marine and freshwater biodiversity and ecosystems, restoring, regenerating and protecting collapsing ecosystems. Secondly, to prevent and reduce pollution, including plastics and nutrients and other kinds. And thirdly, to make our blue economy carbon neutral and circular. Next. This means a different kind of approach. The mission will have to move from the kind of research and innovation projects we've been doing over a decade to systemic piloting of different possible solutions, moving up to demonstration, deployment, and market entry, and scale up of innovative solutions. The mission needs to take risks. The mission needs to be implemented across its two phases, involving those who are willing to invest in this systemic change. The first phase is the development and piloting phase until 2024, where we will be laying the foundations for the mission's specific objectives and the enabling actions. And that means in particular that we work out where we're going to start and what we're going to start doing, and in what way we can build up towards the scalability of the solutions that are there. The mission lighthouses, which we'll talk about in a moment, will be central to this. These are particular places that people live in around the sea basins of Europe, which will be used to draw and accelerate these transitions. They will demonstrate on a large scale the solutions that we need to deliver on mission objectives. They will provide foundations for things like blue parks, a new initiative to extend and reinforce protected areas. And we will be providing the support in this phase to take forward a very ambitious initiative on the digital twin of the ocean and the knowledge system that is needed to be shared and developed with our citizens. The second phase, from 2026 to 2030, all of the solutions being developed and piloted in the first phase will then be harnessed and scaled up and brought forward to deliver on the mission and Green Deal objectives in practice and in places across our economies and societies. Next. In the first development and piloting phase, the mission will roll out lighthouses in major European sea and river basins. The lighthouses will be mission sites and hubs demonstrating how to implement the mission objectives. So the scale of the change that we have has to be broken down into a number of natural ways in which, and places in which, we are organized around the European Union to address the issues of our water system. So if you see these on stream here, you'll see there are 4 lighthouse areas. They're basically sea and river basins. If you look at the Danube River Basin out to the Black Sea, the Atlantic and Arctic Sea Basin systems, the North and Baltic Sea Basin, and the Mediterranean Sea Basin, we will be organizing the actions of the mission in these particular areas. The lighthouses will go much beyond mere demonstration sites, because they will be living innovation hubs involving people like yourselves and business communities and business ecosystems in developing and implementation of solutions and in the replication across the European Union. We'll be trying to develop and encourage new sustainable business models and new markets for sustainable innovation and circular products, solutions and services. The lighthouses should bring together SME communities, investors, philanthropists, regional and national regulators to build lasting and vibrant investment communities focused on the goals of the mission and based in the mission area. So the incentive is to make the future better where you live and work. Close alignment with the regional and smart specialization strategies, which you know about from the cohesion programs of the European Union, will be critical to ensure that there are synergies between the different programs at regional, on regional local innovation at a necessary level. Next. To support all the mission objectives and mission lighthouses, there'll be 2 cross-cutting enablers to be implemented. One is this digital ocean twin and a water knowledge system, engaging all of the means and systems that we have in place and bringing them to a different level. If you think about our society, we're the first society that can actually determine what our future choices are. And we have many of the means that are slightly disconnected to do that. Whether we're talking about observation systems, the satellite systems we have, the modeling systems, the IMODNet systems, the different biodiversity monitoring systems, we need to create them all together so that those who need to prepare for this transition, whether you're talking about how you prepare for your work in coastal cities, or in terms of the work on the seas, or in fishing communities, or in the new areas of proteins, or investment, or dealing with extreme weather, or sea level rise, that we will put in place the means for communities of practice to understand more precisely, with greater length and greater precision, the context in which they're operating. The second of the enablers, which is probably fundamental to the success of this transition, you can have all the technology and science in the world and things don't change if people are not at the center of things. So a major support to engaging the European public to lead this transition and to catalyze the necessary transformative change would be central to the way in which the mission is developed. We probably need some kind of a democratic, deliberative infrastructure as part of the way in which we function as a society, and not a series of little isolated projects and so forth. The program, if COVID has taught us anything, is that our democracy also needs to innovate to put people and their concerns and the trade-offs, because it must be a fair and just transition, at the center. Next. So you in the SME community, of course, who are driving innovation, will be central to the conception and the implementation of the mission as our mission partners. It's not just about bringing market innovations to ensure restoration, the protection of marine and freshwater systems and biodiversity in entirely new areas. There will be entirely new parts of the economy that will emerge. There will be new markets and pricing systems. There will be new opportunities to develop entirely new business areas. Whether we're looking at pollution-free seas and waters, greenhouse gas emissions for a neutral and circular blue economy, there's an extraordinary opportunity that is opening up here for people like you. So we need you to become leaders and key members in these investment communities that the mission will strongly support over this decade. We need close cooperation between you with other stakeholders, and we need you to help us to reach out and bring in investors, philanthropists, and above all, local communities. We need bold, sustainable, and vital innovations in business models and products that will ensure the health of our ocean and waters for the benefit of all of us. If you think about the age of physics that brought us the kind of digital companies and organizations that we have, we're now entering the age of biology and the age of the biosphere. Where will the new business models and the new opportunities arise there? It's a huge opportunity in Europe, given where we set our goals as a society and where we place this in our economy. We need to bring about societal transformation, social innovation to support the measures to restore the health of our oceans and waters, and we need advice and innovation in doing that. Next slide. So we can only do these mission objectives together, that's self-evident. It is community-based, and we need vibrant and lasting investment communities that are a key ingredient of creating and developing and exploiting the potential of the mission lighthouses and the scale-up of the mission. We need to bring people together to work on these objectives and define them and turn them from concepts into solutions. We need to work in areas with investment communities, such as creating together the right innovative investment tools, public, private, blended, to support mission objectives responding to mutual needs. We may need to invent entirely new toolboxes to do that. We need to develop new sustainable business models and products. We need to lead joint projects to implement mission lighthouses that benefit local and regional communities. We need to explore and realize synergies across all of these great programs with smart specialization at the center. And very importantly, we need to disseminate what is being achieved in terms of information, knowledge, and learning about innovations, because the scaling, the replication, the access, which is going to be such an important part of developing a fair and just next version of the world we're living in, will so much depend on having access to these breakthroughs and this knowledge. And we need to identify scale-up needs, investment tools, and other needs. And saying these things is easy enough to do, but when you think about something like the regeneration of ecosystems, where are we going to do that, and how are we going to do that if we don't assemble the collective mindsets of completely different kinds of communities who have perhaps been operating in a different way, and give them a new ambition, give them the means, and give them the space to do this? It's one thing to rebuild hundreds of thousands of homes. It's another thing to recreate the destroyed areas of marine protected areas, or coastal systems, or river systems. This is a completely new way of getting there. So our workshop is a really promising moment to start this conversation about how to mobilize these investment communities for the benefit of our oceans and waters and all of us, and not in the generic sense, because The oceans and water systems are the assumptions about everything we do wherever we live, whether you're there in Slovenia or you're out in the Western Islands or you're in the frozen north or you're in the sunny Mediterranean. The water systems will decide our futures. So, last slide. As an immediate next step, we will be working with our member states, our regions, our international partners in each of the sea basins to deliver and implement the lighthouses. And we're going to do this through a series of charters, implementation charters. We're going to work out for each of the sea basins a place where we can convene and invite the actors who want to transform their sea basins and the world around the sea basins to the goals of the mission. We will support the lighthouses to launch the mission in a massive support from Horizon Europe and other European Union instruments. We're starting with additional funding of 344 million euros between now and 2023 for this mission. And we're planning to adopt an amendment next year to launch the first actions to get things moving. On mission innovation communities, we will need to mobilize and have your advice and feedback from events like today in Portoroz on how to involve and engage communities in this new way of working, in developing and scaling up solutions and innovations so that we can decide, design, develop, demonstrate, and have access to the next version of where we live in a sustainable way. So I'll hand you back now to Kirsten and Christos, who can maybe bring this into land. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, John. I think you did an excellent job in presenting this very dense material, but I'm very pleased that you indeed highlighted the importance of the contribution that small and medium enterprises can bring to the mission, and also the discussion we have now planned in our program is obviously to offer more insight to this question. And I would also think that the slides would be available to the participants of this workshop, obviously to facilitate and their spreading up of this is the idea, also to reach out the most people possible. Now, I will turn to the discussion we have planned for now. It's a session of questions to Kerstin Dunlop, who is online with us. And I will remind you that Kerstin is the CEO of Knowledge and Innovation Center, and Darko Manakovsky, who is here with me in this room, a member of the mission board, that was mentioned clearly also by John, and well, the work you have done for developing the mission is also to be celebrated. Now, what I want to focus on with these two panelists is how we can build upon a vibrant investment communities to support the mission. So you have both experience in building such communities, in dealing with private, public, blended investments, and in ecosystems particularly that are related to the objective of the mission, meaning nature protection, climate adaptation, the blue economy. So I will turn first to Darko with a question. We have planned to a couple of questions for each one of you, but at first I start with you, Darko. So in your view, what are the main challenges for obtaining a steady and sustainable flow of private investments to the mission actions?
Well, thank you, and hi everyone, welcome. I just wanted to start maybe by saying, I'll take a little bit longer, I think, for this first intro answer, but I wanted to start by saying that our colleague John Bell from Brussels, he said that the mission is about trying to build peace with nature, or that we're trying to, that people are disconnected fundamentally from nature. Of course, when we talk about peace with nature, we are really not talking in the language of banks or investors or impact investment and anything else. So I think this is, the segue into this discussion that we are really talking about something that will require a completely different approach in terms of how we can identify, test, and scale innovation that doesn't really align with what we currently have in terms of building blocks when it comes to private investment entirely. So I think this is the starting point. So one is language. So if we look at what we've got today, for example, what are the things that we have in terms of building blocks to invest? We've got ESG investment, okay? This is something that potentially we have to move away from, of course, because ESG investment in its core, it's not about transformation, but it's rather about trying to remove liability from yourself and shift it somewhere else, but trying to kind of go, I see some people nodding here. It's really, it's quite a dangerous word in many ways, because we're going we're moving away from the fact that we want to transform and decrease the profit-making potential for things that have a high risk for biodiversity or climate and so forth. So that's not what ESG does. What it does is we shift liability for me as an investor for the future when things potentially don't work out as we want. So that's one thing. The language has to go. The other thing, of course, is if we look at impact investment, the volumes that we have today in terms of something that's innovative and the investment logic isn't there. So how can we actually move to be able to do impact investment on the scale that's required, right? Because the volume, again, the absorptive capacity of innovation is quite limited for impact investment. We need to actually try and orchestrate this as a portfolio of different investment opportunities so that we can actually have larger volumes where we can align that with larger financing instruments as well. We see that Credit Suisse and other large banks now, for example, have impact investment tranches. But again, they're quite blocked because they can't find where to actually have enough volume to be absorbed so they can do that. The third one, of course, is big finance. That's what we want to go, fiduciary funds, pension funds, and so forth. But big finance is very conservative. Usually they kind of sit and wait patiently to see how public money will move the market in terms of innovation so that they can do that. And this is, I think, where we see the opportunity for SMEs. You know, we have the building blocks in terms of the investment vehicles that need to be coordinated in a different way. We've got the ambition. What we shouldn't underestimate is that if politicians, for example, don't actually move in the right direction quickly enough, it doesn't mean that those that work with innovation, SMEs, and also investors can actually push the market towards that direction. So I would say that the challenges, again, are moving away from ESG because the language is a barrier. If we look at, we just had a talk with the EIB, and you know, we were talking, saying, okay, so can the EIB invest in SMEs that want to do something that has to do with nature restoration? Well, no, and it's not only a volume question, but it's the question that if the EIB would put money to a commercial bank, the language the commercial bank does to actually do due diligence on any SME that wants to do with restoration is a problem. So even though the money is there, the language is a barrier to be able to access it. So even if we solve the volume issue, the language is still an issue. So that's one of the barriers. The other one, of course, is first loss capital. How do we don't coordinate enough. The Lighthouses are a perfect example of this that we're envisioning in the mission, right? How can we bring a community together so that we can actually provide not the investment logic only, but the trust needed so you can actually, as a first loss capital provider, let's say a foundation, can come into this and say, okay, I will work slowly and have a sort of a sustainable flow to de-risk your investments if you can build a community around that to bring in the impact investment. And on top of that, if we manage to do a portfolio approach, then you increase the volume, so then we can get some of the larger players to come in. So yeah, I'll stop here. I think I'm going over time, but a lot to discuss.
Thank you very much for bringing in already the challenges. Yes. And I will turn now to the other panelists. Kirsten, you are also very much experienced with the climate communities. And my question to you would be, how can the mission best identify and support innovation and small and medium enterprises through the investment communities as well as otherwise? So what is also your reaction to what you heard so far? And how can we really put this public that is listening to us today also more into the mood?
Thank you very much. So first of all, I'm just maybe a small disclaimer from my part. I am particularly concerned around the question of climate action, mitigation of climate change, adaptation, resilience, and I include within that scope the massive question of environmental protection, restoration and regeneration and biodiversity. So I'd very much want to embrace, in the scope of my answer, this question of ecology and economy, as well as society and culture. There's 5 points I'd bring to that question. You know, how do we better identify and support innovation and SMEs that help us address those challenges, and that therefore become more and more relevant in a context of financial support and investment in addressing those challenges. The first one, and probably most important from my experience and my perspective as a knowledge innovation community supporting the development of very early stage ideas and accompanying them right through to scaling. The first is to assume that we need innovation to help us learn how to achieve the scale of change we need, the pace of change we need, and how to tackle the complexity of physical change, social change, economic change that we know we need. And the reason why I'm emphasizing that is that at the moment, a lot of our innovation models tend to be looking more for the notion of innovation as a collection, an act of collecting solutions, that simply where the assumption is that these are businesses or early stage enterprises or ventures or technology solutions that can simply be plugged in and will solve problems. And we know anyone running small businesses and trying to build up and build into a new economic model, a new venture, a new part of a complex puzzle knows that it's simply not that easy. And we know the more and more we face into the huge gap between where we need to get to and where our current policy and financial commitments are, we know that we're facing a type of change, a type of self-transformation that is immensely difficult. So we need to change the way we're thinking about innovation. And that becomes a different input, if you like, into innovators and to business owners to think about the role that you are playing in a broader context of really significant structural and a structural change and large-scale transformation. What that means is that working alone makes no sense. So I would really want to emphasize John's observation about the importance of a portfolio of many different actions and what Darko was referring to in terms of a portfolio of many different investment opportunities. At every point, we need to bring together very many solutions to work together. And that, of course, leads me to a second observation, which is not always comfortable in our current market structures and the language with which we approach businesses almost at every point. And that is investing in radical collaboration rather than competition, and really seeking to actively support different businesses to come together and work together through ecosystem and portfolio approaches to begin to understand the value of innovation as a weaving together of many different small fragments of a much bigger whole, which leads to systemic change by design. And of course, that means beginning to rethink the way we think about collaborating through supply chains, the way we think about value chain design, industrial ecosystems, economic ecosystems, and a shift in some of our core fiscal mechanisms when it comes to opening up open data, commons, land trusts, value chain trusts, and so on. So we need to introduce different models around participatory ownership, return, and so on. Then the third point would be, we are here talking about missions. And for every innovator out there, what that means is starting with what is needed, not what we currently think is possible or feasible. The mission is about naming the space that innovation needs to help us bridge, which is how the hell we actually transform ourselves to where we need to get to. And that's actually decarbonization by 2030. That's restoration, regeneration of oceans and water systems in significantly more wholesale and complex and accelerated ways than we've ever contemplated. And that means working from a demand-led logic. So instead of thinking, I've got a solution, who might I sell it to? really starting to work back from, if we need to change these kinds of ecosystems, these kinds of ocean management practices, these kinds of business models and global value chains. One of our core projects, for example, is on the entire global value system on feed that is fed to fish. So the big salmon farming, ocean farming, it's one of the most damaging value chains in the world. How do we change that in a very, very significant way and completely restore it, turn it into a regenerative system in 10 years? And the last 2 points are that requires enlarging the scope of action. So here we cannot and we must not be thinking about innovation and innovation solutions in businesses purely in terms of technology. This is about braiding together policy innovation, social innovation, fiscal innovation, innovation in terms of open data systems, innovation in terms of participatory grant making, participatory financial stakes, and so on. And that leads to my final point, which is, in order to do that, we have to invest in capability and mindset. And for SMEs in particular, it's probably one of the areas of greatest need and challenge, how to have appropriate support where it's needed, right down to the ground, to support how to deal with different impact frameworks and monitoring, evaluation, learning that helps engage in a much more systemic mission-led logic, how to deal with financing of multiple sorts, how to start to engage with some of the challenges around shifts in governance or in tax systems or in fiscal incentives and so on, and how to acquire kind of access to information, knowledge sharing, knowledge generation, open data systems. When you're running a kind of ramping up a small business, you're trying to deal with a massive ecosystem of all sorts of other businesses, everybody competing for attention. That kind of investment in the capability to work as part of a system, to work as part of a portfolio, to think and act with others, to hold and work through long-term partnerships, and to think about demand finance, offtake agreements, long-term partnerships that pull through proofs of concept and help scaling. That requires, in many cases, a net retraining and reskilling, and in some cases, really working to support graduates to come in and work as interns and kind of work on almost a reverse mentoring context with some of our core SME system.
Well, Kerstin, thank you. Thank you very much for putting the accent both to the need for collaboration and also the need to look on not what we want, but rather what we have to invest, particularly for reaching the targets that you really highlighted in your intervention. And the opportunities should come from that. And I will turn again to Darko to say, I mean, what is your impression about all these vibrant investment communities, how they can contribute to the lighthouses, for instance? We heard about this specific future for, I mean, this new element in the way the mission ocean is conceived. So how they can come in and contribute to the lighthouses as we present them by John and are in the implementation plan of the mission.
Yeah, definitely. Also, I'm going to weave this into maybe a comment on Kerstin.
Yes, of course.
Comment
please.
a little bit. Is it possible to put Kerstin on the screen? It's easier to see her facial expressions when we discuss. Here we go. Thank you. So, I mean, I think, so the demand side is really true. We have to understand what is needed rather than what we have, then we apply somewhere by any means necessary. And this is, we have that partly now with the missions because what it gives us is a roadmap. It gives us an indication. This is what we stand for together. This is where we're going. We're in Europe. Maybe we want to influence outside of Europe, but this is what we've agreed to do. We want to transform these systems. What do we do now? Okay, so we've got some sort of plan. It can be changed as we move forward. But I mean, no point to comment on that. So the demand side is there. Of course, demand comes with the need for absorption of financing. This is a bit more tricky, right? Where do you put it, given the language, again, that we use and the requirements necessary when you release funding into this demand side, which are quite strict and require something else that's aligned more with what the market wants rather than what the demand is for what we need to be able to have a socially positive future that's sustainable somehow. So I think this is where we come into this idea of pooling things together, let's say in portfolio approaches around lighthouses or pooling resources together. What we have today, unfortunately, is that we pool the resources, let's say like in a large multilateral or a bank, but then what happens is that the bank decentralizes their resources in single point investments. So it's kind of like you're decreasing the transaction cost for investors, but you're increasing the transaction cost for impact, right? So you're splitting the investment even though you made the effort to pull everything together. This is something that potentially we need to move away from. Of course, the challenge is competition and other things. But this idea about transaction cost of impact is quite important. I think what the Lighthouses are giving us is really a point to cluster things so that we can actually build this kind of absorptive capacity around a place, a geography that we're testing with all of the networks and everybody else that's there, that's based on the demand side of what we need to do. Right, so we're basically building demand for something new. We're trying to build an investment logic that would work. The key here would be to not potentially use or build a new financing vehicle because, you know, how many are we going to have, frankly? We've got many. I see Andrew over there smiling. What we need is really to understand how can we actually connect these in a way that will give us what we want, so that we can, for example, I'll use the normal word, but de-risking of some of the more constricted or restricted capital that we flow into the Lighthouses. This is not to say, however, that we have to, or we will be able to move away from single point investments directly. It's not possible, of course, because of the way the economic system is built and the way all the shareholders are, you know, being able to maintain their purchasing power. So what we need to do is understand how can we actually move beyond blending finance, but also blend the actual return on investment within portfolio opportunities that can blend single point investments that provide a return to maybe create more of a balanced overall return for the entire portfolio. So this is one way that is not really being tested. There's been talks about it, but it's one way to do it. I think in terms of the Lighthouses, this gives a perfect opportunity for us to try this. Again, if the politics don't move quickly enough, that's fine. I think what we need to do is really understand how we actually build the demand side, this absorptive capacity that we talk about. This is where SMEs can play a crucial role. For example, if we look at Sweden, there are examples of using carbon neutral steel, where you know, there are financial incentives provided to the end consumer to buy a car that's slightly more expensive, which been built on carbon neutral steel, for example. So there are ways to actually use SMEs to be able to push the market in a specific direction. But again, for this to happen, we have to blend single point investments with a more ambitious approach to how we can actually put together different types of investment. Again, philanthropy here will play a very big role in terms of first loss capital, because as John Bell also said, we're talking about something that doesn't really yet potentially have a market. We can do things that have a market in the Lighthouses. We want to do that. This is the starting point. But the end goal has to be to move to a more systemic way of investing, where we can actually work more jointly together, I would say.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. And I think you gave very good examples on how the Lighthouses can really bring in this support or highlight the way that small and medium enterprises can get involved. I have a second and a last question to Kirsten, because the timing is running short. We started a bit later, but I think we are catching up. And so, Kirsten, of course, you can react to what Darko said, but also I would like to ask your opinion on how we can harness support and build communities to scale up of the mission to deliver this systemic change. So we heard the need to build the communities, we heard about the possible ways to scale up the results, but how, in your view, this can happen?
So let me start, let me answer that directly, and then I'm going to come back and connect it back to the idea of systemic investing, because that's absolutely crucial to the work that we're doing and the lessons we've learned about where some of the biggest obstacles to achieving what we're describing are. So from the perspective of how to build a community and how to build up, and where the assumption from my perspective is the community is one that carries and offers a huge entrepreneurial capability and contributes to Europe's leadership in building and investing and spreading out that entrepreneurial capability and then industrial transformation capability linked to social transformation and just transition. I think, first of all, it is very, very important to cast the net wide. And we are very often doing things in silos or in sectors. We're tending to take a sectoral view. And that tends, therefore, to type us into things that are incremental because they are what we expect to find or what we've learned to see, rather than looking for quite explicit or uncomfortable cross-pollinations and combinations. And that's indeed where we see some of the most exciting innovations simply don't fit any of the boxes or are managing to combine very, very different solutions into multiple cash flows and multiple multi-dimensional business models. So cast the net very wide and use what we would call reconnaissance to really try to understand what is out there, who is developing something that could be relevant to this particular type of problem space. And don't assume that that's about recognizable solutions, but about lines of inquiry and good question asking. The second is to make sure that the tools and support that are placed to enable entrepreneurship, to business building, venture creation, SMEs, are accompanying every single stage. We know perfectly well that, the famous valley, the multiple valleys of death, are really very much about the fact that very often again, leaning into the notion of specialization, we have accelerators that specialize in early, in middle, in late. It's, in our experience, really about accompanying all the way through to from very, very early, right through to incubation, acceleration, scaling, and what happens when you start to engage in systemic change by design, which is a whole new chapter of accompaniment into implementation in situ, in specific and multiple contexts, what it means to engage with long-term demand and challenge owner partnerships and offtake agreements and demand finance, insurance mechanisms, all sorts of things. The third is to pick up on something that is uniquely to Europe in terms of its spread and its excellence, and that is the principle of clustering and ecosystems. We have 98% of European business is in the form or shape of an SME, and so much of that is clustered in industrial clusters and industrial ecosystems, and that's where we have an incredible opportunity to lean in and encourage this proliferation of diverse interventions and the conditions for trust and combinatory effects. That is what we need to work across silos and across sectors. So it's also about connecting up those ecosystems and clusters to one another in more interdisciplinary ways. But there is a principle of trust building, of relational, social, and commercial capital that starts to become very powerful when we're talking about systems change, and very powerful as an investment proposition. And that does come back to Darko's point about changing the structure of investment. Then I think there's a question around leveraging global experience. There are knowledge innovation communities across Europe now in many areas with a more than 10-year consolidated experience in what it means to bring in and support transformation, innovation when it comes to legal questions, tax questions, finance, policy, but also materials, technology development, education capability. That's a huge power. The European instrumentation around InvestEU, some of the new areas on equity financing or business taxation for the 21st century. There is really the need to bring in European excellence and also global excellence when it comes to enabling the development of businesses and fast-tracking learning and the sharing of learning. My experience is that we continue in this space to need to invest in a much greater degree of inclusivity. And the key leverage point here is to invest in very early stage technology development, business development, and venture development with gender, a much greater emphasis on a gender balance in all points of support, from coaching, mentoring, advice, counseling, legal advice, technology development, scientific partnerships. And gender is one of a number of vectors. We have at the moment a two-patterned system of interventions that don't reflect very well the diversity of intelligence and collective mindsets that we need. Then the other side of that is really tailored support as we start to get really fully into the question of intervening in complex systems and trying to understand and work through what does it mean to bring in multiple different types of financial levers, and what does it mean to capture the feedback loops from innovation experience into policy making and regulation so that we can support the whole system change that we need. And lastly, I think there's a question here about continuing to orchestrate transformation. Our number one learning as a knowledge innovation community is that transformation does not happen on its own. Businesses do not automatically hook up with other businesses. and collaborate for long-term partnerships. There is no automatic set of incentive systems supporting systemic change. This is about a very, very deliberate, systematic support over time, which I think the framework of the missions actively encourages, and the implementation plans are designed to support. But that really does come back to Darko's point. There is an issue here in terms of the design of implementation and the implementation pathway to fully understand and comprehend the need for convening, facilitating, connecting, supporting, holding, that what I am describing as orchestration. And there is a really critical need to understand that the more we fragment finance into the hunger for individual bankable projects and individual investment initiatives, the more we have our foot on the brake at the same time as we have our foot on the accelerator. We cannot accelerate into systemic change until we take our foot off the brake and start to invest at a portfolio level in whole value chains, in whole ecological areas, in whole cities, structuring an investment vehicle that is the portfolio itself and its capacity to induce a set of collaborative and complementary effects through innovation experimentation. And once we start to create that, Climate Kick has launched what we call the Transformational Capital Initiative. There's a white paper out there and a prototype starting now in Switzerland and in Vietnam to structure the vehicle that does make it possible to get public and private capital and investment into place-based portfolios and systemic portfolios that enable us to pull through and accelerate this an early stage development of innovation driving transformation that then creates very, very large new economy investable propositions. But they start to look a lot more like what we need, not what we think is possible right now.
And definitely you put also the accent again at the same point, not what we need, but what we have to. Sorry, not what it's possible, but what we have to. And also the holistic approach that we have to have for investments. You also put the accent to the enablers that are there. So we are not have to create those, but we have to use them. And I know we are out of time, but Darko is pressing me for one comment for half a minute, because this is then the last word from Darko before I resume.
Thank you. I'll be quick. I think this is quite a fascinating discussion. I just wanted to maybe go back to this idea of the lighthouses and what we need. Mm-hmm. I think it's really about, we're talking about a movement. And I think very specifically what we need is to understand what are we going to do in the next year to understand the sequencing of how we set these up. So very practically, beyond the abstraction of what is needed in terms of this, how we structure the investment and so forth, what is the sequencing of building the demonstrators? When do we test? For how long? When do we scale and so forth? So we need to understand that. The second thing we need to understand is what are the different investment windows across the different types of investors, and what are the different tranches that will be available? And we can build that. Now this again is the language of very traditional investing. I think I agree with Kirsten. I would end, yes, and I would say that I would also say that we, for the short term at least, should also allow to have single point investments within a portfolio, if there are venture capital and others that want to do that, just so that we kind of get them into the fold, of course. So again, what are the existing vehicles? What are the windows? What are the trenches? How do we sequence this so that we involve the right communities at the right time? I'm sure we'll come up with a plan for that very shortly. And there was another thing I wanted to say, but now I see you looking at me like there is no more time. So
yes,
what I'll say is that we have the building blocks,
yeah,
which is the different investment vehicles. We've got the ambition, which is the mission, and I think we've got a reason to be optimistic. Mm-hmm. But I think it's going to be a joint effort, and I think it will definitely require quite an uncomfortable way of thinking if we want to get to the end goal.
Exactly. And we are in the start of it, and certainly this is not the last discussion, and this certainly is not the last gathering that we will have with business people. I believe there is a time to digest this information, come up with more questions, and from our side with more answers. And I think we all have to play a role in doing that for having a successful delivery. It's yes.
Just to mention, there is Blue Invest, of course, that we have experience with.
Exactly. As I said, we have the tools, and we will show this more how we can reach this objective by using them. At this point in time, I have to thank you all, to thank you, Darko, Kirsten, to thank John also for contributing to this session. I believe we have touched on the surface of things, but we will have the opportunity to go deeper. I think here in the room we will have a discussion in the participatory way. I mean, of course, we will have to break for 5 minutes first. I know we are out of time, but we will resume here around 4 o'clock, I think. But online, there will be a continuation of the session, as I said. So we will disconnect from the online session, but there will be this virtual reality part. And then I will invite you all to join us again in this the plenary in about, for 50 minutes, around 4 o'clock. So thank you all for being here, and I hope you stay with us until the end of the session. Thank you.